New York.
Apple.
Hot dogs.
Dollar.
Hollywood.
Democracy.
Freedom.
Rock and roll. Wall Street.
Statue of Liberty.
Los Angeles, California.
McDonald's. Jeans.
Bubblegum. Video games. Nintendo.
What's so great about America?
Every Saturday night, 7 to 9 p.m., explore American culture and language.
With Master Steve,
Ina MK,
And Hasba Cutie.
tune in to find out about what makes America so great.
The Great American Weekend. Listen exclusively on Radio Van 103.1.
Also, watch us on the Radio Von Facebook page, website, and mobile app.
Good evening, dear listeners of Radio Van. This is
The Great American Weekend.
And we're back here with Master Steve.
And Ina MK.
How are you, Steve?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm good.
Yeah.
How was your week?
Pretty good, yeah. A normal week, and that's, for me, good. How about yours?
I'm looking forward for Sunday. our only
Your
rest.
only real day
Yeah,
off.
the rest day. But also,
Well, in talking
of
about
course,
Sunday,
yeah,
this week Sunday is,
yes.
a couple of holidays. One here and...
I almost forgot, despite of the fact that our theme tonight is Beer Day and also beauty of drinking and enjoying beauty of women. So happy April 7th.
Yeah, which is
holiday of women and beauty.
This is the third
Motherhood,
third month in a row where we have a holiday in Armenia dedicated to
Not
women and
third.
What? Kind of. Well, I mean, Valentine's Day.
Yeah. Oh, is Valentine's Day all about women? You think, Steven?
Most guys I know don't care about it.
Sure. But there are some romantic guys who do. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we're gonna host a guy from UK who is an Indian, and he's a beer specialist, brew-master, beer guru, and
A beer guru, brewmaster. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Neil. Oh my goodness, I forgot his last name. Neil Playfoot. Yeah, here we go. Neil Playfoot is going to
That's why we have
visit.
notes.
Yeah. Is going to visit us later during this show, so don't you miss this one, because we're going to find out a lot of things about beer, about its healthiness, and good stuff that we can learn about it. And
tomorrow, April
the
7th.
kinds. Yeah.
April 7th every year in the U.S. is, since 1933, is Beer Day. Now, it's not something that if you walk up to your average American and say, oh, what's April 7th? They're not going to say, oh, yeah, it's Beer Day.
Happy Beer Day.
Happy Beer Day. And then
Happy
today would
birthday.
be New Beer's Eve.
Yeah, it almost sounds like happy birthday.
So
yeah.
it's not like it's a holiday that people actually celebrate, but it's something with historic origins.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes out of that very strange thing that the Americans tried a little over 100 years ago. No, not quite 100 years ago, called the Noble Experiment. And the Noble Experiment
is spelled different.
Oh, yeah. And noble as in like admirable and...
the night.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Not Nobel as in like a Nobel Prize. I mean, whoever came up with the idea of Prohibition should not win a Nobel Prize. It was a bad idea, a disaster. I mean, they thought it was a good idea at the time. But so in 1920, the American government
came up with
the
this
18th Amendment. Oh, I mean, the idea goes way, way back, over 100 years before 1920. And the 18th Amendment to the Constitution outlawed the production and sale of alcoholic beverages.
What were they thinking?
Well, they were thinking a lot of things, and they obviously weren't thinking correctly, because a lot of the things that they were thinking just didn't materialize, didn't happen.
Even maybe it had the opposite effect.
Yes. In fact, well, we'll talk about that a little bit more.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot to talk about. And if you guys think that this topic is interesting, I know a couple of days ago I shared a little video in our Facebook group, right? And it was for the PBS Ken Burns documentary on the Prohibition. So it's 3 episodes, an hour and 45 minutes each episode, and it's filled with great information and facts, and it puts all of this into perspective. And I watched it this week, and there wasn't a whole lot in there that I didn't already know, but it presents it really, really well. Prohibition, they outlawed alcohol in the United States. And this was an achievement that took over 100 years, going all the way back to the early 1800s. There were movements in the U.S. to try to deal with alcoholism and alcohol abuse and the toll that people thought it was having on American society, American industry. And even before the Civil War, there was a movement to try to outlaw alcohol. But then with the Civil War...
Yeah, of course.
No, there were states, I think it was Maine and a couple other states that outlawed alcohol. They had their own internal statewide prohibition. And it didn't work that well. In fact, the term...
I wonder which state was the most strict one.
I don't know. Maybe Utah. I'm not sure. It's most strict. That would be interesting. Maine outlawed it in the middle of the 18th century, early 1800s. Sorry, and there would be guys walking around town with little bottles in the legs of their pants to try to hide them from the police, who were going around trying to enforce this prohibition law, no alcohol. And, you'd walk up to the guy and you'd slip him a little bit of money, and then he'd pull a little bottle out of his pant leg and you'd take a swig out of it, and then he'd pop it back in and walk away.
People become so creative when it comes to hiding stuff.
Yeah. And that's where the term bootlegger comes from.
There you go.
Yeah. So there was this struggle for a long time between what were called the wets and the dries. Okay. And the wets.
The good people, the bad people.
It's not that easy. I mean, in fact, in retrospect, you can look back and say, well, yes, prohibition was a great idea. It really was the noble experiment. They were trying to do something good. It just didn't work. For various reasons, right? But the wets were the ones who wanted to keep alcohol legal. And the dries were the ones who wanted to make alcohol illegal. So, you can say that, there are countries in the world, right, that where alcohol is illegal now. Some of the Muslim countries in the world right now, they're dry countries, right? You can't get alcohol there. Actually, Dubai isn't. I mean, if you're a Muslim living in Dubai, you're not supposed to drink. And they're not supposed to serve you alcohol or sell you alcohol. But foreigners there can drink and buy alcohol, no problem.
Sure? Because
in
one
Dubai,
of my friends, I think,
in Dubai,
they traveled to Dubai, and they asked one of their friends to send some alcohol from here because they were out of it and they couldn't buy it there. Or maybe it's too expensive.
It might have been. Well, I think it's expensive. Everything in Dubai is expensive.
Speaking of the prices that we need to pay.
Yes.
There is an advertisement break, but we'll come back with more on beer, prohibition, and of course, beauty. Stay tuned. This is the Great American Weekend.
So then I tell the bartender, no, you keep the change.
Guys, I don't get it.
Ina, it's an American thing.
Learn more about American humor on Great American Weekend.
Welcome
we
back
had a
to the Great American Weekend here on Radio Vaughn.
And we had a specific jingle specially for this episode.
The bartender.
The bartender. And are there any special alcohol jokes?
A lot of them. I can't think of any off the top of my head right now.
Please,
but there are
if you
a lot.
remember.
Okay, if I
Yeah.
remember, I'll just bust out with a joke. So we had the wets and the dries,
Yep.
right? And, you know, today, especially in America, but even here, drinking is not as common as it once was.
In America.
In America, even here, I think, just the world in general, you have to remember that water used to not be all that easy to come by.
True.
Clean, fresh water. So at different times in human history, people would drink more alcohol than they would water. Wine, beer, things that are fermented, that have alcohol in them, won't really have germs growing in it. Unlike water, if you just let it sit, or say, juice. So at different times in human history, people would drink a lot of alcohol, a lot more than we do today. But a lot of times that was weaker alcohol. The beverages didn't have as much alcohol content to them. So beer or wine, not more than 10% alcohol. So we're not talking about people would be sitting down every day drinking whiskey or vodka.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. But is the alcohol in general much more expensive now than it used to be in the back days?
It all depends on what you're drinking, I think.
Yeah.
And, alcohol 200 years ago, 300 years ago, it wasn't as much of a commercial thing. People would make their own wine at home.
Yeah.
And,
right.
and
the moonshine.
Moonshine, and stuff like that. So the early 1800s in America, people would be having a beer or a glass of wine with lunch or with dinner for sure. Farm culture, America was mostly rural at that point. So you'd have, your lunch in a pail, you'd be working out in the field, you'd stop in the middle of the day to have your lunch, and you'd have a drink with it.
Basically just like a juice.
Yeah, it'd be like a soda, like having a soda. And because people's bodies were used to it, and because it was usually things like beer and wine with a lower alcohol content, it wasn't like, you were going out for lunch and getting drunk and then, going back to work, right? So you didn't have that sort of like stigma associated with it. After the Civil War in the U.S., things like whiskey and rum, harder drinks with higher
popular.
alcohol content, became more available and less expensive. And so what started to happen is, instead of, having a beer with lunch, you're going to have a whiskey. And there's a difference there.
The quality of life has changed.
Yeah.
But I think in Europe, this practice is still there. I mean, they drink a lot of, like, Italians or French people drink a lot of wine with their food.
Not as much anymore.
Maybe not during lunch.
Yeah. I know I remember when Disneyland Paris opened up, that was one of the issues that they had was, hey, I'm on lunch break. I'm working at Disneyland Paris. I'm on lunch break. Can I have a glass of wine with my lunch? No. And Disney was like, no.
Nope.
No, you can't. So, and things have changed in that respect. But what So with that availability of harder drinks came a larger prevalence of drunkenness.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
hey, if you're working in a factory or working out in the field and you have a beer with lunch and go back to work, for most people it wouldn't really bother them. It was, like having a soda. You have a whiskey or maybe two and you go back to work and that's a problem. So Prohibition became an idea in America with this change in drinking cultures, the availability
With a
of
change
harder
of percentage.
with a change of percentage. Also, there was an influence of immigrants coming from places like Italy and France and Ireland.
There you
Before
go.
that,
Yeah.
I mean, these are people that would drink more
Because they were used to
they
it
were
again.
well, in part because they were Catholic and not Protestant. The Protestants were much more austere and didn't drink as much in general. The Catholics didn't mind that as much. Drinking. It's not, the Protestants
Not
were a
a
lot
big
harder
deal.
on that. It's not as big of a deal, and so there was a struggle between, or a conflict between the Protestant culture in America, which was predominant throughout the country, and the largely Catholic or Orthodox culture of new immigrants coming in. And boy,
we are ready for another break, after which we're going to listen to Why You Follow Me by Eric Bennett. Stay tuned. This is the Great American Weekend. We're going to come back with some more interesting info on beer, prohibition, beauty, and much more.
Hey, what kind of fixins do you like on your hot dog?
Fixins?
yeah, relish, onions, mustard, ketchup, condiments.
Conda?
No, not that.
Oh, fixins. I love chili dogs.
Learn about American cuisine on the Great American Weekend. Welcome back to Radio Vaughn. This is the Great American Weekend with me, Master Steve,
And myself, Ina MK. We're back, and by the way, our guest is already at the station. He's watching us carefully. So hello, Neil. Hope you're comfortable over there.
we've had a little bit of time to chat with him.
Yeah.
And
we can't
we're
wait to
looking
have him
forward-
here
yeah, I know.
on the red couch. So, we spoke about beer and prohibition, and I would like to be an Armenian here now in the studio and tell a little bit about the beer history in Armenia. So, beer has been produced in Armenia since ancient times. In the 5th century BC, after arriving at a village in ancient Armenia, Xenophon, wrote in the Anabasis. Stephen, how do we read this?
Anabasis.
Anabasis.
Yeah.
That there were stored wheat, barley, vegetables, and barley wine in the crudders, the clay pots. In upper level of vessels with the edges in the wine floated barley, and there was stuck a reed, large and small sizes, and who wanted to drink had to take a reed in his mouth and pull it through the wine. Not mixed with water. The wine was very strong, but for local people it was a very pleasant drink. We even have a beer festival held annually in Yerevan during the month of August. It was first organized in 2014. The Swan Lake, located in park near the Yerevan Opera Theater, is usually the home for this fest.
Yeah.
And a lot of...
And I've always missed it.
Maybe
I'm usually traveling in August.
Right, you're not here.
A beer festival in Yerevan?
Yeah, the 5th edition of the Yerevan Beer Fest, held in August 2018, hosted more than 10,000 visitors. Can you imagine? So
Nice.
Yeah. And a lot of breweries and microbreweries of Armenia. So the first brewery in modern history of Armenia was opened in 1892 in Yerevan. But however, it was closed during the 1920s.
Oh,
This is the information that I have.
nice.
So
So, in addition to having a great wine culture, Armenia has a long history with beer as well.
yeah, so maybe we're close to doing a beer revolution sometime soon. And I'm sure Neil will tell more about this when he's
yeah.
here.
So another thing that led up to Prohibition was this idea of perfecting humanity, perfecting society. Okay, so of course, with alcohol, you sometimes get drunkenness, and drunkenness can lead to violence and just
Sins.
yeah, licentiousness. I'm not going to define any of these debauchery. Just generally counterproductive and unsavory things. So the late 1800s and moving into the early 1900s, the Prohibition movement, which actually was kind of early on, it was more of just a temperance movement. And here's the difference. With temperance, what you're talking about is not outlawing alcohol, but maybe restricting it a little bit and convincing people not to drink, especially people who have a problem, what we say in English, handling their alcohol, okay, who, are prone to drunkenness and all sorts of, negative behaviors that come with that, right?
So it was kind of like an anti-propaganda of alcohol?
Well, no, I mean, it was, temperance movements were kind of, okay, if you can't handle your alcohol, if you can't hold your booze, okay, then you should just stop drinking completely. And so there were different groups and societies, organizations that gave support to people who wanted to stop drinking. One of the famous modern day one, which didn't come around until in the 1940s, was Alcoholics Anonymous. Okay, but there were the Washingtonians, I think around the Civil War, just before the Civil War, and this was just a group of people. They would sign a pledge to not drink, and they would meet regularly to kind of keep each other accountable. Okay,
and
so
motivate each other.
Yeah. And so this was the temperance movement. But the temperance movement, at some point, some people in it decided that, the people who really need to stop drinking are probably not capable of doing it. They're not responsible enough. And so for the good of society, we need to outlaw alcohol to make American society better, stronger, more productive. So
and perfect.
Yeah, closer to being perfect, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't necessarily the conservatives that were pushing for prohibition. A lot of times it was what were called the progressives, the people that were kind of liberal, that wanted change. They thought, if we get rid of alcohol, we're going to make a better country, a stronger country. We're going to have more equality, more wealth, everything. And it took a long, long time and a lot of, persuasion and working with different organizations and political groups. In fact, there were two issues that women had a big influence on in American politics in the 1800s and the early 1900s. Those two issues were slavery, the abolition of slavery.
Women again.
And prohibition. Women were very big in abolition, getting rid of slavery. But without the organization of women politically, and this was a lot of this happened before they even had the right to vote. Okay, without women organizing themselves politically, prohibition would have never happened. So women were. This is one of those issues, those points that women used to really strengthen their position in American society, their voice, and their political power. Maybe.
Maybe.
So
We're going to listen to People Are Strange by The Doors. Maybe we should have Women Are Strange. Stay tuned. This is The Great American Weekend with Master Steve.
and Ina MK.
Oh, say, can you see?
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed?
Adamast, what are you doing?
He's trying not to forget where he came from. Welcome back to the Great American Weekend here on Radio Vaughn 103.1 FM.
And we're drunk with all the information that we have for now.
Tell me to stop. Tell me to stop.
No, please.
I've
please,
had too much.
We love all your encyclopedia knowledge about everything. So please,
So finally,
share some more.
So finally, the dries, right?
The dries.
The dries, right? Finally, the dries got enough political power and backing in 1917 to have Congress. And they didn't just pass a law, right? Because states had outlawed alcohol, cities had outlawed alcohol, counties had outlawed alcohol in different places around the United States. And it didn't really work that well because you could just transport it. This city outlawed alcohol. Well, I'll just, take my car over to the next city or my horse over to the next city and I'll buy it there. Same thing with the next state. It was hard to regulate it. So that's part of why there was a push to do it nationwide. And the nationwide thing, well, can we really restrict what people buy? Is that really constitutional? Can we impinge upon their freedoms that way?
It's not fair.
Well, if we make it part of the Constitution, we can. So right up there, the amendments to the Constitution, the right to freedom of speech, right to bear arms, separation of church and state, right? You've got all of these. And then all of a sudden, the 18th Amendment banning alcohol.
Yeah.
So this is a constitutional...
Brilliant idea.
A constitutional amendment. And no constitutional amendment had ever been repealed before. So when the Dries won this, when they won Prohibition and got that constitutional amendment passed, they thought, this is it. It's done forever. Alcohol is illegal.
Yeah.
Right? Not so.
But they
really.
didn't know.
So
what's
Congress
gonna
has
come
to
next.
pass. Congress has to pass a constitutional amendment by 2/3 vote, not just by majority. And then 2/3 of the states, according to the state legislature, have to pass it as well. So in 1917, Congress passed the amendment, and then they had 7 years, a time limit of 7 years for 36 of the 48 states to ratify it by passing it in their state legislatures, their state Congress. 7 years is how much time they had. It took less than 2. Okay. Now, the constitutional amendment was fairly vague, and a lot of people supported it, believing that, well, it's not going to ban all alcohol. We can't do that. Thinking it was just going to be hard alcohol, whiskey, rum, vodka, things like that, gin. Okay. But what happened then is the Volstead Act was passed. And this is a law that declared how they were going to enforce the 18th Amendment, prohibiting the sale and manufacture of alcohol. And this was incredibly, incredibly strict. Okay. People wanted to get rid of saloons, where guys would go and sit and drink all night and get drunk and stumble home and, spend all their entire paycheck on a Saturday night, and then their family wouldn't have money for the rest of the week. They wanted to close the saloons. They wanted to get rid of whiskey and rum and the hard liquors. But the Volstead Act got rid of everything, drinks or food, that had more than 0.5% of alcohol.
Oh my! Because I heard people drinking perfume.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the so the Volstead Act was incredibly strict, and a lot of people were surprised and upset about it. I thought we were still going to be able to drink beer. No. Right? They could. You couldn't sell wine or manufacture wine, But if you as a household could make wine, then you could make up to 200 gallons of wine per household per year, as long as it didn't leave your home. That was legal. Okay, but households back then had 5 to 10 people in them. So 200 liters of wine for a household of 5 to 10 people, when everybody's used to having a glass of wine with dinner every night. Well,
yeah,
you know,
was
what?
too little.
Yeah.
But what if everyone made alcohol in their homes?
Well, and that's kind of what started to happen. There was a disagreement between the states and the federal government in the U.S. who is supposed to enforce the Volstead Act, right? Who's going to go around and make sure that nobody's buying, selling, or manufacturing alcohol? Who's going to patrol the borders to make sure that ships aren't bringing it in from Canada or even from Europe? Okay, there are stories that John F. Kennedy, that his grandfather got rich, allegedly, by importing whiskey and scotch from Scotland and Ireland during the Prohibition.
During the right time and the right place.
Yeah. Who's going to patrol the northern border with Canada and not let any alcohol come in? So, the federal government was saying, well, the states have to do this, because the federal government really didn't have that much money at that point in time, and they didn't have they didn't have the manpower. They just didn't have the people. A state like New York, okay, which has probably had the biggest city in the country, New York City, and also a fairly large population in general, even outside of New York City, as well as a big long border with Canada. They only had 200 officials, like policemen, special Volstead Act enforcers, that were supposed to keep the entire state dry. Yeah.
No way.
The states are saying, we're not paying for this. The federal government is saying, we don't have money to pay for this. And the local police are like, we've got better things to deal with. So the enforcement of it was just poorly done, right? And people wanted their alcohol. So this is when organized crime in America really started to take off. I mean, before that, organized crime was dealing with gambling and prostitution primarily, and drugs a little bit, but drugs were not very prevalent.
Now they had a new sphere to deal with. Yeah. That's the alcohol.
Oh, yeah. We're getting into alcohol. In fact, during Prohibition, probably the most famous American internationally was Al Capone.
Yeah.
And Al Capone made his money, his business, before Prohibition. He was a minor player. His business was gambling and prostitution. Okay. But with Prohibition, it became alcohol. And he, just was raking in the money. He wasn't the wealthiest. He wasn't the biggest, the most powerful, or the most prolific in terms of producing and selling alcohol, smuggling it around. But he's a guy who loved the media. So he would hold press conferences. Here is this guy who everybody understands what his business is. His business is selling booze.
Have you watched the movie?
Yeah.
About him?
Oh, yeah.
It's awesome.
His business is selling booze. And he would have press conferences.
Yep.
And make this is what I'm doing. Why didn't people stop him? Because he was paying off the politicians.
Everyone.
The judges, the policemen. Okay, there was I think it was an attorney general who should actually be taking him to court and finding him guilty of violating the law. This guy was shot and killed in a mob style hit. And Al Capone's defense in the press, they never arrested him. They never investigated him as a person of interest in the crime. In the press, he just said, look, he was on my payroll. I was paying him off a lot of money every month. Why would I want to kill him? He wasn't going to touch me. So this is how bad things were when it came to enforcing Prohibition. People just thought it was a joke. They didn't take it seriously. Okay, so and then so in the early 30s, the dries really started to kind of lose power and lose influence. And finally, when Franklin Roosevelt, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was elected president, the Great Depression had already started. They passed the 21st Amendment to repeal the 18th Amendment and make alcohol legal again. But it still had to be ratified by the states. But in the meantime, while they were waiting for that to happen, Roosevelt repealed part of the Volstead Act and made alcohol that contained, 3.2% alcohol, beer. So it's weaker alcohol content beer, made that legal. And that law went into effect on April 7th. 1933.
And there was a big party all over
a huge
the place.
party. And Franklin Roosevelt, who even during Prohibition, he used to have the press over for cocktails in the White House, right? So, I mean, the hypocrisy was huge. Yeah. So Beer Day is April 7th because that's the day that beer was made legal in the United States for the first time in 13 years.
Indeed. It's a good thing to celebrate. A good occasion.
And Roosevelt, when he signed the law, said, I think now is a good time for a beer.
Yeah. So, and now is a good time for a break. We'll be back in a little bit with some more information and also some quotes about beer. Stay tuned. This is the Great American Weekend.
What's the best word in American English?
My all-time favorite word is but I usually refer to it as lovemaking.
Become more fluent in American English and slang.
We're back in your studio with our great master Steve.
And Ina MK.
Thank you. And we're also eager. We can't wait to welcome our guest in our studio, Neil, who's going to tell us all the secrets about beer making.
Making great beer.
Yeah. But before that, let me just read out a few quotes that I have about beer. There are quotes about beer. Can you? Yes.
Oh, who wants to talk about beer? We should stop talking about beer. Just drink it.
Yeah. Also, let us thank Shant, who helped us, Shant Kirmizian, who helped us find Neil. Thank you, Shant. An official thanks from the Great American Weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So now, let's start with the quotes. Beer is proof that God loves us and wants us to be happy.
And now, what kind of derelict, what kind of drunkard would say something like that?
Hey, Stephen, don't offend Benjamin Franklin.
Yeah.
You just...
No, I mean, I'm joking,
yeah,
right?
But I know. I'm also joking.
Benjamin Franklin, probably the most well-educated and intelligent man in America during the American Revolution.
What he was saying.
He knew what he was talking about.
And another one. Work is the curse of drinking classes. I love this one. Oscar Wilde said that. Curse of drinking classes.
Oh, I would go to work, but I'm too busy drinking.
Yeah. Never underestimate how much assistance, how much satisfaction, how much comfort, how much soul and transcendence there might be in a well-made taco and a cold bottle of beer.
Nice. Tom Robbins. Contemporary American novelist.
Yeah. Jitterbug perfume novel. This is a quote from that novel. So another one, whoever drinks beer, he's quick to sleep. Whoever sleeps long does not sin. Really? Whoever does not sin enters heaven. Thus, let us drink beer.
Yeah. And what kind
Luther.
of Martin Luther?
Yeah.
Martin Luther, like the man who started the Protestant Revolution.
Yep.
Wow. So yeah, religious people drink.
So we're done with the quotes and we're pretty ready for some news highlights, right?
So, no, wait, isn't there another quote here?
There was another quote about beauty.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because tomorrow is Motherhood and Beauty Day.
Okay, let's do that. The beauty of a woman must be seen from her eyes, because that is the doorway to her heart, the place where love resides. Audrey?
Audrey Hepburn.
Audrey, we love you. Thank
So
you.
beauty is in the eye of the
Drinker.
of the beer drinker. So now here's another one. Here's another slang term: beer goggles.
What?
Have you ever heard that one?
Nope.
Okay, beer goggles. It's kind of a college thing, you know. College boys be sitting around at the bar, having their drinks and looking at the girls that are at the bar. Oh, she's cute. She's cute.
She's
oh,
not.
she's hot. And then you smack your buddy on the shoulder. Man, you got your beer goggles on. She's not hot. She's kind of ugly.
Oh, like the
Yeah, the more you drink, the better
beer.
she looks.
Okay. So this is the term specifically for women.
Usually, yeah, but it's almost always used for
Relates to women.
Yeah. But it's,
Okay.
you got your beer goggles on. You've had some stuff. You've had too much to drink. You're seeing the world not the way it really is.
The world and women. Thank you. We will wait for some more slang words from our master, and now
But
we
now
can.
it's time for the news.
Yeah, let's start.
What do you got for us, Ina?
With my favorite. Armenia PM's wife urges Azerbaijani women to join her peace initiative. Oh, who? The wife of the Armenian Prime Minister, Anna Hakopian, is in a speech in Congress, has urged Azerbaijani women to join her Women for Peace initiative. Hakopian is paying a 17-day visit to the United States, where she is set to hold a number of meetings with lawmakers, officials, civil society members, and representatives of the Armenian community.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, women power. Women taking...
Yeah, this is the first time I hear such an initiative from, especially with
First
a
Lady.
call of women participation.
Yeah.
So, following her husband Nikol Pashinyan's appointment as Armenia's prime minister, Hakopian has become the chairwoman of board of trustees of My Step and City of Smile charity foundations. According to her, Women for Peace initiative aims to unite women from all the sides of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict to reject war and help save lives. As a woman and mother, I am confident that the most valuable thing in the world is human life, she said in her speech. We call on women in Azerbaijan to join this initiative and send the message to decision makers there. That's
Nice.
a good idea. I really like this one. Also, a couple of news. For instance, this one, Najarian selected as Glendale Mayor. So this Tuesday, April 2nd.
Oh, Glendale Mayor?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Glendale City Council member Ara Najarian was selected as the city's mayor by fellow council members. Yoo-hoo.
Nice.
And another one in Los Angeles, Stephen. We're gonna have a Armenian History Month on Wednesday, April 3rd, at the direction of LA County Board of Supervisors Chair Janice Hahn and Supervisor Catherine Barger. The month of April will be declared to be Armenian History Month.
Nice.
So this will be the third time in county history that Armenian History Month has been formally recognized. Since.
And why in April?
Yeah, because it is also a month which reminds us to commemorate the genocide date. So, honored Armenian Genocide Remembrance Day.
Great. Now, I think I should take some time for slang.
Yay.
Set aside a little bit of time for slang here, because I think now I use a lot of these terms and just kind of throw them around, and I think I've used some of them already on the show tonight and haven't stopped to explain any of them. But when it comes to drinking culture and alcohol, there are a lot of slang terms. I already talked about dry and wet, right? There's one, a teetotaler, Teetotaler.
Totaler?
Totaler, yes. Which is like capital T for like total abstinence.
Yeah, like T-shirt.
No, like total, capital T for total abstinence from alcohol. A teetotaler. So it has nothing to do with like drinking tea. It's,
I see.
Temperance with a capital T. Total abstinence from alcohol, right? A teetotaler. Donald Trump, the current American president, is a teetotaler. He doesn't drink.
Is that a good thing? I don't know. I don't know about that.
Any topic concerning Donald Trump is a can of worms, and I'm not going to open that can of worms right now. Do you know that idiomatic phrase, a can of worms?
Well, I can guess what it means.
Yeah, I mean, imagine if you had a can filled with worms, and they're all in there crawling all over each other, and then you open it up, and then they want to get out, and they just start coming out, and you can't put them back in because there are so many of them, and they all start getting away. It's a can of worms.
You're such a good describer. Don't do this to me on air.
Any topic.
I hate worms.
Any topic regarding Donald Trump is a can of worms, and I don't want to open the
and
can
here
of worms.
you go, dear listeners,
right now.
Another new phrase, can of worms.
So there are all sorts of words to talk about alcohol, right? And a lot of these have their origins in Prohibition era, like, bathtub gin, okay? Really strong alcoholic drink, usually clear colored, and it's
vodka?
People would make really, really strong, like 90% alcohol drinks. One, because it was kind of easier and they weren't really concerned too much with the flavor. And then they would water it down and mix it with other things. Cocktails became a big thing during the Prohibition.
Yeah.
A lot of cocktails were created during the Prohibition because the alcohol
they don't show
was
the alcohol.
was of such harsh quality that you didn't want to drink it. You didn't want to drink it straight, so you would mix it with stuff to make it more palatable. So bathtub gin is a word for just really strong alcohol, along with white lightning and moonshine.
Moonshine,
right?
I know.
Firewater. Firewater, these are all words for strong spirits. Okay. And
spirits.
Yeah, spirits. Beer is beer. Wine is wine. Distilled liquor is their spirits, right? Suds is a slang term for beer, okay, because it's got
Suds.
the foam on the top. You can also talk about, and this is a phrase that comes up in country songs. In fact, there is a country song called "Long Neck Bottle." You ever heard that one?
No.
The lyrics are something like, "Long neck bottle, get out of my hand. I've got a woman at home who just won't understand." But I mean, the difference between
who just won't understand. Okay.
the difference between like a glass bottle of, say, Coca-Cola and a beer bottle, right? The beer bottle has that longer neck. The thin part is, so they're called long necks. So when you say a long neck, you're talking about a bottle of beer. You're talking about a bottle of beer.
And Stephen, did you explain earlier the booze, the word?
Booze?
Yeah. Where does that even come from?
Isn't it obvious? I have no idea. That's one I would never have thought to look up because it just
it's so
is.
obvious.
It's just
a word.
Is. Yeah, booze. Or a booze hound. A booze hound, somebody who drinks a lot. A wino. Okay. Someone who drinks a lot.
We've checked in our on our page some recipes that you can make beer like brownies and maybe other desserts, and you don't even know what kind of stuff you can make with beer, and it's really yummy.
Oh yeah. Well, beer or alcohol ends up in in a lot of foods. Beer batter for frying up fish. You can use sambuca or pernod, these anise-flavored liqueurs to make to fry up shrimp. Flambe.
I think I'm
if you
getting
really
hungry.
if you really want to make good red sauce to go with your spaghetti, you got to put a little bit of red wine in it. Okay.
Red sauce, red wine, and the red line here telling
telling us we've got to go.
Yeah.
But I've got more slang, like sauce
1
and
minute.
hooch and liquid courage. These are all, again, other names for alcohol. Liquid courage.
Liquid courage.
I got to take a shot of
Yeah,
liquid courage.
That makes sense.
Okay. The phrase, beer is liquid bread.
Yeah.
Especially if you're talking about like stouts, real heavy, dark
Beer.
beers.
Bread
Like
for your
Guinness.
soul.
Right? It's 5 o'clock somewhere, right? Which is this 5 o'clock is quitting time, right? You're done with your job at 5 o'clock.
Oh,
you can
yeah.
go to the
Well,
bar and have it.
depends.
You can go to the bar and have a drink. So, if you need an excuse to have a drink, or if you're sitting there on a Saturday afternoon and you're going to have a beer with your lunch, you can just say, hey, it's 5 o'clock somewhere.
5 o'clock anywhere.
5 o'clock somewhere. It's time to drink. Yeah, a wino is somebody who drinks too much. Skunky beer is a way of talking about beer that has gone a little off. It's a little old. Doesn't taste quite right. Okay.
And one more, the last one.
No, I'm done for now.
You done?
I can't do just one. Oh, okay, here. 3 sheets to the wind.
Oh.
3
What
sheets
is
to the
that?
wind means you're drunk. You're really drunk. 3
So
sheets
should I
to the
say
wind.
You are 3 sheets to the
You're
wind?
3 sheets to the wind. He's 3 sheets to the wind, meaning like an old sailboat. It's got all of its sails up, and it's picking up all this wind, and it's just cruising real fast.
So
He's
it
3
has
sheets to the
nothing to
wind.
do with
He's
poop.
gone. He's out of here.
So 3 sheets, there's nothing to do with poop? 3 sheets.
Depends on how you pronounce it, but that's not how it's spelled.
I know. Okay, we're ready for a break. Stay tuned. We'll come back with our guest and some interesting beer information, dear listeners of Radio One. We are really 3 sheets in the wind right now.
I would never live in America.
Why not? Didn't you enjoy your time there?
Yeah, why not?
It was good, but it wasn't great.
Because you didn't know us when you were there.
Join Ina MK, Master Steve, and Hasva QT for a great American experience.
Every Saturday on the Great American Weekend.
Welcome back to the Great American Weekend here on Radio Vaughn, and
we're ready.
it is 5 o'clock somewhere. In fact, it's 5 o'clock
Right
in
here.
the UK, where our
Really?
guest is originally from, right?
I am from the UK.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you for coming, Neil. Now,
Welcome to our studio. Do you feel
I
comfortable?
am comfortable. I've been
Great.
listening. I'm getting a history of beer, and I've been enjoying listening along.
good. So what brought you here?
So I was back in the UK, and I was looking for a job. Wanted to go to Europe. We'd been living in Asia previously, and so we were hunting around, and I wrote to a few different places that it was interesting to me, and I'd never been to this region before, and so I wrote off to Daggett because I saw had this brew pub, and everybody seemed to like it, and they were saying actually we just opened this brand new factory, and we want somebody to come along. We were just about to go to Russia to look for a brewer. Would you be interested? And so I spoke to my wife, and she said, yeah, I've never been. And so here we are.
Oh,
9
so
months
you
later.
took the job here with Darget,
Yeah.
having never set foot in
No.
Armenia before.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
So, sort of bit of a back history. As a family, my daughter's 5, and she's already lived in 4 different countries. She was born in Thailand, lived in China, in the UK, and just going to a new place, and we're really enjoying our time here.
Nice.
So, about your last name.
Do you want to hear the story?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's not that many people with the name Playfoot. There's actually more in America. But it comes... I don't know why I'm going to say this on there. But anyway, it's like... No. Apparently there used to be one village idiot. And he would sit on a barrel and he would play with his foot. And the fact that somebody actually married this village idiot and then we spread... So this, yeah.
And it got better.
It got better. Well, I hope so. I don't know.
I think so.
The jury's still out, maybe.
We're pretty sure.
You're here, and you're the brew-master, the mastermind behind Darget, which is making the best beers in the country. So, I don't know.
Thank you for saying that. Well, you know, it's. I came, they already had the beer, the beers they were brewing, and so they started a couple of years ago with the brew pub. And it seemed very popular, and they were like, well, let's see if we can possibly take it to the next level. And they were looking for somebody with experience that had been in different beer markets. As I said, I've been in China and other places. So yeah, the idea was bring me along and help them to get their beer into bottles, and we'll see how it goes from there.
Nice. And I see it in all the grocery stores now. So apparently it's going well.
Yeah, it's like, and the other day driving home, I was like, what's this? And there was the signs up there as well. It's just
really? I haven't
now.
seen the signs yet.
It's following. I'm being followed around. I go to work and I come home, and then I go to the shop and I can see it everywhere. It's
And now we go for a short break, and we'll come back with some more info. Enjoying Neil Playfoot's company here in our studio, sipping some beer.
Some Darget beer.
Yeah.
Because it's 5 o'clock in the UK.
And it's 5 o'clock right here in the studio. Stay tuned.
Hello?
Hi, is your refrigerator running?
No, it doesn't have any legs.
Some American jokes just don't work with foreigners.
Speaking of America, yes, we're back with the Great American Weekend, and we're a great Indian guest from the UK, Neil Playfoot, who now lives in Armenia and makes magic with beer.
Yeah,
that's very kind of you.
And Neil, could you please tell us if you ever traveled to the US and worked there, probably?
Yeah, so the US has always been a country that's fascinated me, and around about 2001 I had a chance to go with my best friend, and one of the interesting ways to travel around, you can get these like Amtrak passes. So we did like the East Coast and we did the West Coast, so we did 21 cities in 90 days, which means, so we started off in Boston, went all the way down to the Keys, went into Reno, went into Nashville, then went across to the other side to the West Coast, went all the way up there and went into Vegas. You know, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. I will keep away with what happened there, but it was an interesting place. And it's one big country, but it's lots of little countries in between.
Oh yeah.
Depending where you are and people's outlooks, and yeah, it's an interesting country. And then you have California, which could be a country in itself. You know, from the beach, you go up into the mountains, and it's there's too much to cover and too much to see. I've only seen a little bit of it, but it was fascinating.
Now, I've been going back and forth. I've been living here for quite a while, but I've been going back and forth from here to the U.S. since about 2006. And in terms of beer culture there has been a huge change. You know, it used to be just Budweiser, Busch, Miller, Coors, you know, these big mass-produced beers.
Sure.
Now I go back, for the last several years, I go back to Minneapolis. Minneapolis isn't a huge city. It's not a really trendy or fancy city. But I go back there, and there are all of these little brew pubs everywhere. You go to the liquor store, and there are 100 different beers. A lot of them these small breweries. So there's been this, you know, microbrew, craft beer revolution in America. What can you tell us about that?
So,
I mean, and that's what's brought Darget here. I mean, that's why Darget is happening here.
What about Armenia?
Absolutely. I think there will be a little craft beer revolution in Armenia, and hopefully we're at the start of it, because I think there will be room for growth. And actually, if other people opened, a little competition would help, because it would allow everybody, because it just gets the word out there to have a bit more choice. But as I was saying, to go back a little back in the history, because you were going through the history quite well with beer and alcohol. So what happened was in homebrewing was actually outlawed for quite a long time. You weren't supposed to be able to do it. And then in 1979, Jimmy Carter passed a law to make homebrewing legal. And then
which actually part of the reason that it was illegal had to do with Prohibition, and they had just for some reason never
decided.
Yeah.
So homebrewing, really, then people opened up. They had the opportunities, and it grew around little centres in different cities, homebrewing clubs, homebrewing shots, and obviously there'll be people selling or giving their beer to their friends, and their friends would like it and say, can you sell this? Can you sell this somewhere? And then probably up to about 90% of brewers in America possibly were home brewers initially, and so it came from there. And then the guy who put together the homebrewing association in America is a guy called Charlie Papazian, and he's of Armenian descent.
Wow.
Yeah. So
See,
there is a link back to Armenia, and so the homebrewing society is actually part of the wider society of the brewing associations in America, and so in a way, because of homebrewing to craft brewing, and then it becoming more popular, leading to new different styles. And most of the styles that we see will start off in America, then maybe spread to Europe, and eventually go over to China. But it was, so for example, Dargett, it was one of the owners went over to Canada, and he fell in love with craft beer there, and decided when he came back that he was going to open his own brewery. So in a way, it's probably down to Charlie Papazian in Armenia that I end up in Armenia myself.
So an American Armenian who was a big fan of brewing beer at home ends up being the reason why you're here
in a roundabout way. You could type
Armenians connecting people. By the way, we still have half an hour till the end of our show. And for those of you guys, listeners, now you have to be active, because you need to guess what kind of beer does Master Steve likes the most.
Oh, what's my favorite beer?
Yeah, what is Steve's favorite beer? And if
I've
you
got
do,
one, yeah.
you need to get on our Facebook page and write down your options under the video, the live video broadcast. So if you guess, you will get a beer from our guest, a dark.
And I wrote it down right here, so I can't change my mind.
Yeah. So here you go, guys.
All
this
right.
is the paper. We're gonna show
Now,
it
You
in
don't
the
look like
camp.
a glitter beer guy to me. Have you heard about glitter beer?
No.
It's a new craze in America now. And so you have like the edible glitter you can put on cakes, but now they're putting it in beer, and so when you have it round, it swirls around. I'm not sure if I'm a fan, but it seems to be a craze. Glitter beer.
Sorry, it's taking me a minute to wrap my head around that.
So it sparkles.
I can understand, on St. Patrick's Day, you put the green dye in the beer to make green beer for St. Patrick's Day. But okay, all right. What are some other trends in the U.S. that you know of, or just worldwide with this craft beer revolution? What are some of the new experiments that they're trying with beer?
So what it is now is craft beer has got to the point where...
Oh my goodness, we have a caller here.
Well, okay.
Let's try this.
Sorry. This is new.
Interested to see what's
I
going
thought I left the phone off the hook. Is this the red phone? Is the White House calling us?
It's Steve, your glitter beer is ready, no?
Yeah, my glitter beer is ready. So,
Hello?
While Ina tries to figure that out, Neil, why don't you continue?
So what happens is the craft beer revolution has gone on, and it's spread to different countries. What you're finding now is other countries have decided, how can we make it uniquely our own? So the new trend is like local trends. So for example, when I was in China, I would do something with tea. Obviously tea is famous in China, and things like that. And so what we're going to find now is like different countries will go off in their own little tangents, and it would be interesting to see, because everybody has a national dish or has a national fruit. So obviously here in Armenia we have apricot. So we're trying to do something with apricot beer. I don't know. I mean, I've made a chili chocolate beer in the past.
A chili
which went down really well.
chocolate beer?
Yeah, because the Chinese like their spicy food.
Oh.
But
nice.
and then it ties in with the Mexican idea because you have chili and chocolate.
Well with chocolate?
Well, I don't know. Have you ever had the dark chocolate with chili peppers in it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So imagine turning that into a beer.
The beer.
Yeah. They can do amazing things with beer these days. This summer I had a peanut butter porter.
Okay.
From I think it was Dangerous Man Brewery in Minneapolis. And it tastes like a really rich stout with a peanut butter taste to it. And I love peanut butter and I love stout beers, but I was like, I don't know. But it was great. I loved it. Yeah.
So when it comes to brewing, it's not all the flavors generally come at the same time. So when we're trying to put a beer together, so like as you say, you could get the stout come later and then the peanut butter comes. So like with a chili chocolate stout, you get the chocolate at the front and then like the chili will slowly come later. People were coming back for more when I had it on at the festival. It's like, you've got to try this beer.
I need some break here. What about a music break?
Okay, yeah, let's play some music.
I'm getting hungry.
We'll be back with Neil after this musical break.
We'll be back pretty soon. Stay tuned and think about Steven's favorite beer. You get a chance to get some beer.
Վարչապետ Նիկոլ Փաշինյանը հեռախոսազրույց է ունեցել Ղազախստանի նախագահ Նուրսուլթան Նազարբաևի հետ.
Oh, could they just speak a little bit slower?
Don't worry. You can catch local news, events, and culture in English every Saturday on Great American Weekend.
Welcome back to Radio Vaughn. We're on the Great American Weekend with our guest, Neil Playfoot from Darget.
And now we know what his last name means.
Yeah. Now, how do you make beer? What's the process?
Okay, so the way I like to describe it is I'm just helping Mother Nature, because it's an all natural thing. So you start off with barley. So you get it from the field, you dry it out, and then what happens is barley has starch in it. So if you were to bite it open, it has a little bit of white, and we need to get at that starch. And like a magical temperatures, like between 62 degrees and 68 degrees, there's a reaction that takes place that turns the starch into sugar, and that's what we want. We want the right type of sugars being made, and then we will transfer that into the kettle. But obviously, if something's too sweet, it's not good. So we try and balance it out, and that's why we use hops. Before they've used other different flavors like ferns, but hops works really well. So you have the sweetness of the malt, and you have the bitterness of the hops. And as a brewer, our job is to try and find the balance. And then what we do is we send that over, and then the yeast takes over. And this is where Mother Nature does a thing. So it takes in the sugar and gives out alcohol, and it takes in the oxygen and gives out CO2, which gives you the bubbles.
Carbonation, the bubbles. Yeah. Okay.
So that's a simplified process. I can spend my lifetime trying to do it 40 years and I'd never still be an expert. It's like going down the rabbit hole that you can learn more and more over time.
Now, you mentioned a chocolate chili, like a chocolate pepper beer.
Yeah.
Is the British would say chocolate chili, but if the Americans say chocolate chili, then we're talking about like beans, like Mexican, like chili dish. So Americans would say chocolate pepper beer, probably. Where does the chocolate and where do the chocolate and the peppers come in that process?
So initially, you when you drink it, you'll get the nice little sweetness of the chocolate. You think, oh, that's quite pleasant. Then all of a sudden, it starts to build up, and then the chili will come to the back. So it's when you have your tongue, the different parts of the tongue actually give you different flavors. So bitterness on the outside, sweetness more in the middle. So it's kind of the stuff that we get nerdy about as brewers, to be honest.
But I mean, like, so you start.
Do you add like flavors?
I mean, do you make the beer and then add the flavor to it? Or
no, we have the chocolate in, and what you can
with the barley or with the.
So when we put it in usually in the because we have to boil the beer to actually sterilize it to make sure it's clean. So a lot of the flavors will actually go in with the boil, because heating up releases flavors. Like if you're making a cup of tea, obviously you have to steep it because that will bring out the flavors. So a lot of them go in there. But something like the chili would generally go in after the process is finished. So you can make like a tea, or you can make like, what we do is I heat it up, cook the chili, make like the chili juice, and then that would go into the finished product before it's shipped out.
So are you trying to say that there's the real chocolate inside of that beer?
We have different things, but it's like cocoa nibs is what we call it, which is part of the leftover bits from the chocolate process. That will actually, it doesn't stay in there, but it gives the flavor.
The flavor.
Yeah.
Okay. Neil, what are the right snacks for beer? Because we know chips and salty stuff.
Right.
But are there any like unique things that people don't usually use, but that are good to go with beer?
I'm trying to find, like, I don't know, what was it? Brewdog, they made a bacon and maple syrup beer.
Maple syrup?
Yeah, maple syrup beer, and they actually served it with like 2 slices of bacon in the glass with it. And then they did another one with the ice cream, and then they put a slop of ice cream in the top. I don't know.
I'm still stuck on the bacon maple syrup beer.
But it's good.
Could I have that for breakfast?
It's good.
Could I have that for breakfast?
Do you guys serve it in Dargate?
I like to call beer the breakfast of champions. So.
Or have you ever heard of Beerios?
No.
A bowl of Cheerios with beer in it instead of milk.
I'm not sure how productive I would be if I started that in the morning, but maybe I'll take a hit for the team and try it for a social experiment.
So what are the major types of beer or categories of beer? I mean, now we've got with craft beers, you've got all sorts of different flavors. We've been talking about that, but like the major categories. I mean,
the lights.
What does IPA
colors.
mean? What is Pilsner, Stout?
I can tell you a story about how IPA got its name. It's one of the most popular beers in the world now. It all comes back from America. But initially, in England, they made the beer, but back in the 1840s, obviously, the British had quite a large empire. So there was lots of troops stationed in India. Now, when you send the beer by boat, a lot of the time, by the time it got there, it was going off. Now, but if you add hops acts like a preservative. So they would put lots and lots of hops in this beer. And when they put the hops in the beer, when it got there, these troops were drinking this beer and they got a love for hoppy beer. So when they came back to England, they were like, where's this beer that we were drinking in India? So IPA stands for India Pale Ale. So
it's got a high hops content,
exactly,
which helps preserve it, make it travel better. But
then people got a liking for it, and then it became a style of beer that went to England. And then it died, actually, in the 1970s when a lot of the smaller breweries back in England disappeared, and there was only 5 major breweries. And it was really, again, back to America that brought back the IPA.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because I knew it was Indian Pale Ale, but I had no idea how that came about. That's interesting. Yeah. So, out of necessity.
Basically, to make sure that the beer was still drinkable by the time it got to India, because you could be 3 months on a ship.
Yeah.
So by the time it got there, it could have been vinegar. Basically, it would have been good for chips, but not for drinking. So.
Neil, you mentioned earlier in your bio that the more you travel, the more you realize that people in different countries have a lot of similarities. And what about Armenian people? I mean, how are they different from others?
All the same.
You've traveled around so much, so.
Well, one of the things I kind of like about Armenia. So obviously, I was in China previously to come in here, and it's a big country, 1.3 billion people, and how they are, and then you come to Armenia, which is obviously a lot smaller, 3 million, I think, the population is here. But the similarities are the same. And one of the things I like is China is all about family, extended family, and everybody to here. And when I come here, I see that people are important, people's families are important, friends. Everybody seems to look after each other.
And speaking of family, you met your wife in China.
I did.
Right?
I did. I was working in a brewery, and she was traveling around, and she ended up working in a bar. She was traveling around, just odd jobs, and I was working in the brewery, selling the beer to there, and I was like, who's this cute girl working there? And one thing led to another.
Does she like beer?
She didn't like beer when she first met me.
And you changed that.
Unfortunately, if you live with the brewer, eventually brought her around to beer, and now she'll quite happily drink a pale ale. Quite happy. She likes the hoppy beers. It only took 7 years, but eventually we got them.
Oh, that's long.
So I think one of the first beers I ever had was a Corona, and I didn't like it. Okay. I didn't really like beer until I ended up having Guinness.
Right.
Now, I drink all sorts of different beers now, but one of my favorites still are stouts. Mm-hmm. How do you make a stout? How is a stout different from an IPA or a Pilsner?
Okay. So, I know I said before, we basically use 4 ingredients. You use barley, water, hops, and yeast. But you can make barley, it can be slightly different because you have to dry it out. So if you leave it to dry out for longer, it's almost like roasting a coffee bean. So you're using these darker roast barleys in smaller quantities to be able to change the color of the beer. And once you kiln it for longer, it can actually give different flavors. So you can have chocolate or coffee or whatever. So, I mean, there's maybe over 200 different types of barley that we can use. So depending on what style of beer we're making, we try and find the right balance, percentages of different malts, and then balance it off with different types of hops to make each individual beer.
Wow. Okay, so back in Minneapolis. Oh no, I was just going to give something away. Maybe there's a Bender beer by a brewery that I really like, and it's got a coffee. No, yeah, it's got a coffee taste to it. Mm-hmm. So you're saying they could get that coffee taste from the barley without having to add any coffee to it.
But you can also add coffee to it.
So and then like a chocolatey taste you can get just by different barleys, maybe a little bit.
Tweaking things, different beers. I mean, you can accentuate it by adding it, but you can get hints of different flavors. We actually have a barley called chocolate malt.
So is that what they use? What is it? It's Young's Double Chocolate Stout.
They actually put bars of chocolate.
They put jar. Yeah. Oh, okay. They put bars of chocolate in that one.
I hate to interrupt this flavor hurricane happening in our studio, but we're done with our time, and we would like to thank you for flavoring up our evening tonight.
Yes, thank you, Neil. This has been wonderful.
Thanks for sharing all your knowledges. Not all of them, but a pinch of your knowledge with us, and hope that you enjoyed our company as well.
You've made me feel very welcome, so thank you very much.
Thank you too, and say hello to your wife and your girl.
I will do.
And maybe we'll see you around at Dargette one of these days.
Yeah, sure. So. We need to try that chocolate chili beer. Stay tuned. We have another 10 minutes.
And we'll be back after the break with events and
culture.
Hey, Steve, do you like Hush Hadisan Spas?
Yeah, I love them. But what would you call them in English?
Yeah, I'd call them cowfoot stew, chicken porridge, and sour yogurt soup.
Sorry I asked.
The Great American Weekend.
We're back with our calendar of events, and we are kind of dizzy and.
We should ask Neil after the show if Dargette is working on either a Hush, a Dolma, or a Spas flavored beer.
Forget that, Steven. Okay, do you want to start or
Horvat's flavored beer?
Horvat is good for beer, I think. Okay, let's start with Yerevan American Corner events. Steve, would you like to do it as a real, genuine American?
Yeah. Okay. So remember, every Friday at 4 p.m., the Debate Club has an English language debate at the American Corner here in Yerevan. Jim Daly is organizing and moderating the debates. All right. We don't have a topic this week, but the topics usually are interesting. So show up and be surprised this coming Friday.
Should we go there sometime?
We should. We should.
And debate.
Yeah. And then every Monday at 3 p.m. at the American Corner here in Yerevan, we've got the Reading Club. It's practice listening and speaking, your listening and speaking skills in English. This week, they'll be reading an excerpt from Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy and discussing the points of the story. This is an intermediate level English group. And then Fridays at 3 p.m., just before the debates, there's the Teenage Club, where you can improve your English and learn more about American culture and lifestyle. They've got games, discussions, group activities, and tons of fun. For more information, visit their website, americancorners.am.
Thank you, Stephen. Now let's move to the movies in English at Yerevan Mall Kino Park. So April 6th through 10th, we have Dumbo, the animated movie. Yeah, well, partially
it's not
animated.
really animated. Yeah, it's live action with CGI.
Okay.
And I've been resisting seeing these live action remakes of the.
I know your position. So Dumbo, 3:45 p.m. There is a horror movie, Us, at 5 p.m. The best hour for watching horror movie.
Not too late. Yeah. If they had it too late, nobody would go because they'd be freaked out afterwards.
Yeah. There is a new one, Shazam. It's a superhero movie. I think it's a comedy something.
Yeah.
So it starts. There are two hours. One is 4:20 p.m. and another one is 8:30 p.m. And another new one, Pet Cemetery. That sounds
which I believe is it's a horror movie. I believe it's based off of based off of the Stephen King novel of the same name, Pet Cemetery.
I've seen the old one. So
have I read the book.
Yeah?
Yeah, I used to read a lot of Stephen King when I was
we should do an
school.
Episode on movies.
Maybe we should do an episode on Stephen King.
Yeah, could be. So 6:25 p.m. horror movie, Pet Cemetery. Grab your.
Oh my, yeah. Let's keep moving. For music events this week, we've got on April 7th at 7 p.m. We've got singer Natalia. Singer Natalia will have a concert at the Sports and Concert Complex at 7 p.m. Also on April 7th at 8 p.m. we've got Roberto Kel Torres and Heiko, their concert at Prime Hall. Mm-hmm. So, and on April 7th at 8:30, you can celebrate the Motherhood and Beauty Day holiday with Karen Grigorian's quartet at Etnoteca EVN. Mm-hmm. April 11th, 7 p.m., Il Trovatore, the opera in 4 acts at the Opera and Ballet Hall here at the State Theater. And then April 13th at 7 p.m., we've got Cipollino, the ballet in 4 acts, also at the Opera and Ballet State Theater.
And here we move to the festivals. There is Zachgazart Festival in Burakan. It's Palm Sunday, celebrated on April 13th and 14th. It's 2 days. And there is also today and tomorrow. Today was the launch of Dilijan Arts Festival.
This is a youth art and music festival in Dilijan. I believe it's organized by the students at the UWC Dilijan. Mm-hmm. So they've got a battle of bands tomorrow, some high school, college-age kids and bands that are going to be playing in the kind of town square there tomorrow. There's an art exhibition, some young Armenian and young international, because the UWC Dilijan has international students from all over the world. Some young artists presenting their artworks. So if you're free tomorrow, head up to Dilijan. The weather should probably be beautiful and check out that stuff.
And also at the club, for club lovers, Arnie Rock and Hike Solar are playing at Hugo Bar and Restaurant. And we are...
That's it. We're out of time for this week. Thank you for joining us for the Great American Weekend here on Radio Vaughn. We, if you didn't catch the entire show, check out the video that we'll share on Monday on the Radio Vaughn website,
which is www.radiovaughn.fm, and also our Facebook page, Radio Vaughn FM 103.1. Also check our official page, Great American Weekend Radio Vaughn, because we post interesting stuff during the week to get you ready for our next show, which is next Saturday
from 7 to 9
with Master Steve,
Ina MK,
and Hazva
QT will be back with us next week as well. See you then. Have a good remainder of your weekend and have a good week.